a population debate. Today I was just reflecting, where was I when Australia, passed the 20 million mark? And to be honest, I don't know where I was. But today, or this evening, when we tick over the 25 million, I know that I'm a West Australian senator. I know that I've got an important and influential role to play. I know that I care enough about my country that when we get to 30, 35, 45, I want to make sure that Australia's living standards are maintained. I want to make sure that people have, good job choices and good job opportunities. And I've reflected over the last few years that I've become quite an enthusiast for the parliamentary process, and particularly in the Senate. It does work very, very well. People might have had their own experiences of coming before a Senate committee, writing a submission, having their point of view not just put but also interrogated in a pleasant way. Senators are not mean people. And then as a result of that, a report gets prepared, and more often than not, some of those recommendations find themselves into government policies. So my starting position is the country is certainly big enough, it's mature enough, these issues are important to everyone. And secondly, I don't believe that all of the wisdom on population issues resides in Canberra with bureaucrats. And I think that there'll be lots of people who have different perspectives, but when you put those on the table, you'll always get a better outcome. That is my overriding concern and interest.
Let's get your perspective, Peter. What does a sustainable Australia look like to you?
Well, we were here, I think, 5 or 6 years ago with Ian Lowe discussing the same thing. Population was just clicking over 23 at that point. So for me, it looks like a place where we can leave an environment, a natural environment, an economy and a society which is sustainable, which is a good place to live, and which is not being downgraded or degraded by each subsequent generation. So really, to me, what I'm seeing is that, there used to be a time, for the last 100 years, maybe up until the last 20 years or so, where every generation looked forward to having a better quality of life, a better opportunities, more education, more freedoms and so forth than their previous parents or grandparents. But now, if you talk to older people, you'll see that, and even my children say, Dad, I wish I was brought up in the 70s because you had so much, and we don't have that. We don't have the opportunity to get the same sort of education or jobs opportunities that you had. So for me, it's getting worse.
Do you know a number? Do you need to know a number?
I think it's important to set a number which is based on scientific, evidence-based. A number of people have tried to do that. Professor Flannery and others have had a go. People who understand biological systems have said that Australia, to be really sustainable, like the Aboriginals were for 65,000 years before we showed up, but with today's technology, we could get by with sort of 6 to 12 million people, and now we're 25. So, it's not like we're going to reduce our population to that, but we need to live more sustainably with 25 million.
Okay. Now, we can theorise all we like on this too, because we probably do have to agree on a set of numbers, and that is really difficult with population, isn't it? And that's what my reading has told me.
Well, it's turned out to be very difficult. That's exactly right. I like reminding people that in 2002, Peter Costello said that we would reach the 25 million mark in 2042. Indeed, we're meeting it on the 7th of August 2018.
Yeah.
So somewhere along the line, the projections are poorly comprised.
Let me introduce Liz Allen, who's a demographer at the ANU Centre for Social Research and Methods. Liz, welcome to our conversation.
Hello.
Liz, can I begin by asking you about the nature of our population growth? How do we actually calculate it?
So population grows due to a number of components of change, and that includes natural increase, so the balance of births and deaths, and net overseas migration, so those leaving versus those coming in to the country. And at the moment, and has been the case for the last few years, the greatest share of the components of change to population growth is coming from net overseas migration.
Okay.
And then
talk about overseas migration. We're also talking about temporary and permanent migrants in that calculation, aren't we?
That's exactly right. So it's not just what people would commonly see as Australians. It's a count of all people in Australia who meet a particular definition of how long they'll be staying in Australia.
Okay. How fast is this population growing?
So at current rate, we're growing at 1.6% each year. And in international comparison, that's not remarkable at all. But when we compare Australia with similar countries, particularly
OECD countries,
we are among the highest.
Twice.
But the problem is that we can't just look at size. And this idea that we have this debate about big and small, and I take serious issue with the language that was used in terms of a big Australia or a small sustainable Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So that language is really worrying because we should not be having a conversation about size. Inquiry after inquiry into population matters in Australia, and we've had a few, have found that we should not set a size or a quantum to aim for in terms of overall population.
Why do we do it, though? And let's remember that politicians have done it. Kevin Rudd made it pretty clear what size, what kind of numerical expectation he had for this country. What's wrong with that?
Kevin Rudd didn't he didn't come out and point to a target at all. Rather, he was responding to, and as has done government since then, that the migration intake, as I was saying before, it's not size that matters, it's the composition of the population. If we want to talk about sustainability, it's not just about the environment, it's about our lives, it's about quality of life. What worries me is that we have so many people that are on the tail end of their lives saying it was all great and dandy in 1970 when women weren't in the labour force or engaged in education and women's place was at home. You know, we've moved on since then and we have to do a bit of change management at the moment and respond to the needs of an ageing population. We need to take and ease the pressure off our young people so that they can have families, they can dream for a home. It's not migration or immigration that's causing this problem. It is failure after failure of government policy at a federal and state and territory level.
My guest on the program is Dr. Liz Allen, demographer at ANU. Peter, you wanted to respond?
Yeah, I mean, when I first bought a house in a city, Melbourne, in 1978, I was paying 4 times what my income was at that time. That house today would be worth about $2 million, and I'd have to be earning $500,000 in the same sort of job to be on the same sort of whack. So really, housing prices in Australia have really doubled in real terms based on your as a multiple of incomes, and so really, and that's all driven by rapidly mass crush loading of the country with immigration, and we've got 147,000 net births minus deaths, and the rest is permanent arrivals, less permanent departures, plus temporary arrivals, less temporary departures. So, and that comes up to your 380,000, 400,000 people a year. And I don't think there's a distinction between how people live. I mean, people all want to live as well as they can, but now they're being crushed into sort of 8-story high dog boxes in a city, not because they really want to, but because the place that they wanted to live is now too far away or unaffordable.
For my part, I'm not yet totally focused on what is that optimum number, but I am, and I do think that through a parliamentary type inquiry process, you might get some informed discussion about what that number looks like, but more importantly, what influences that number. But what I'm most definitely interested in is what we need to do to service population growth. So what I mean by that is our land use arrangements, our infrastructure access, how we accommodate an ageing population, how we incorporate technologically change to get or to maintain quality of life experiences. And then second to that, I'm also interested in the issue of distribution.
Yeah.
So when we talk
distribution, we talk about congested cities and we talk about regional towns where populations are shrinking.
So we're told, and this is a view that I support, that as a general proposition, population growth has been good for our country. And if that's the case, then I think that population growth should be experienced across the whole country, because your listeners might be surprised to learn that two-thirds of the population growth that happens in this country happens in two places, Sydney and Melbourne. So if population growth is virtuous, why isn't it being enjoyed across the whole country? That's the first thing. But as I've been talking to other senators over the last week or so, what some senators are curious and interested in is the issue of depopulation. So in a state like South Australia, for example, across some rural and regional communities, they are concerned that population growth is becoming negative, so that's affecting the ability of communities, etc. So, but this all points to what I'd say, it's a live issue, it's an important and necessary issue, and at the core of this should always be an effort to maintain Australia's high living standards.
Well, the people are leaving the country because there's no jobs there, and because technology is doing away. I mean, these guys sitting on a tractor now, which is, $350,000, $500,000 worth of kit, it does everything all by themselves. And one man and a dog, where there used to be, 10 people doing that sort of a job.
But there are two realities in all of this. One is that we can't turn back time, and the other is that technology will be and is with us for a long time and will continue to change and advance the way we live our lives.
On the Drive program this afternoon, Senator Dean Smith is with us, Peter Strachan is with us, Dr. Liz Allen, a demographer at ANU, is talking to us too. We're going to come back with the opportunity of calls from our audience, 1300 222 720. I know Liz did not like the definition of a big Australia or a small sustainable Australia, but the essence of the argument is, do you think that as this country gets bigger, as it expands, is there the capacity and the ability, and is that a chosen improvement in your eyes? Or would you like to see something different happen? 1300 222 720. Pete.
So really, I think the essence of this is that we live in a finite space. I mean, Australia is not an expandable country. I mean, we have a finite amount of water, a finite amount of arable land, which is about 6 or 7% of our land mass, the good quality arable land. And already the big cities around Australia all rely on desalination plants to get by in times of dry. So really, I mean, the idea of growing infinitely in a finite space is the modus operandi of a cancer cell, and the cancer cell just grows and grows until it kills its host. So I think we need to be smarter than some yeast, as I said to you, smarter than an amoeba, and we need to say, well, what is a sustainable population for Australia? And in the event that we might be able to squeeze more people into Australia, why would we want to do that? What possible benefit could that bring to the people who already live here?
Liz Allen, can I get a final observation from you?
Look, I'm really concerned at the way Peter is spouting and perpetuating a fear that is not based in evidence. Let's talk the evidence, hey? We are an ageing population. Migrants aren't putting pressure on the housing market. Migrants have a net effect whereby they do not increase housing prices. It's the tax incentives that allow people of Peter's generation to own multiple properties and have people of my generation pay it off for them through tax incentives. This is a lunacy that we'd like to think that we can base this on a bunch of feels. Let's look at the evidence. The evidence shows that at the moment where we're going, we are an aging population. We want to talk about quality of life. We want to talk about the generations that haven't been born yet and that they are not going to be able to live a life and have a family of their choosing, if they choose, because they will be too burdened by the need to care for those at the other tail end of the demographic life course. Migrants are breathing life into this country. We need to innovate. We need to pour our investment in terms of thinking and cash into infrastructure the way that we live our lives. We need to be using this earth better. And if we close the door to immigration, these people will not cease to exist in the world. They will still live somewhere. We have a global responsibility to be a good global
borders
citizen.
Mentality.
Liz Allen, thank you. I'm going to come back to you in just a moment. And Liz, thank you for speaking to us today. We can either talk about numbers or not talk about numbers, but I want to come back with some observations from each of you before we finish up. If we talk about a big picture, what about population growth in the real world? Tracy Roberts is the Mayor of the city of Wanneroo, and within it lies the beachside suburb of Alkimos, determined by the 2017 census to be the 6th fastest growing neighbourhood in Australia, with an increase in population of 25%. By 2021, it's forecast another 10,000 people will be living there. Tracy Roberts, hello to you.
Good afternoon, Geoff. How are you?
Good, thank you. What's the most important challenge where you are, Tracy?
Well, there's obviously lifestyle that people enjoy where they've chosen to live, and the creation of local employment so that people can stay local.
How much of a challenge will it be to service that growth? Obviously, an important part of that will be the provision of very good transport as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we know that this land has been designated for residential for absolute decades, so it's something that we've been planning very carefully for. In addition to that, when you look at the strategic urban growth, we do thank the state and federal governments, because with their recent announcement with regards to the rail to Yanchep, the dualling of Marmion Avenue, and obviously we've got the freeway that's gone to Hester, that will ensure that we're well serviced for our future, to obviously private transport if you're in the car, or alternative if you're using public transport. So we are definitely planning for the growth. And
how will you ensure the sustainability of Alkimos? How do you ensure that those who live there don't suffer from isolation issues and don't feel lost surrounded by other young families?
And that's why the city works very carefully with our community development team. Alkimos, for example, we have the pop-up library there. There's a whole range of scenarios. The shopping centre that's designated in that particular area is huge. It's a city centre that's essentially emerging as a secondary centre. So total retail footprint similar to Whitford's, the Carrying-up centres, and we're ensuring as well that it's a self-contained planned development, which means local services for the local community, medical right across the board.
Thank you very much, Tracy Roberts. We'll talk to you again. Last couple of observations, Dean. What happens next? You want the Parliament to be engaged in something that the Parliament has not been very good at engaging in.
Well, I want the community engaged through the parliamentary process. I challenge that last point, Geoff, because I think in the recent past we have seen the Parliament, work through committee processes and engage on pretty difficult issues and come to not perfect solutions for everyone, but solutions that become workable for the great bulk of the community. But two observations I'd make. There's what I think is a fascinating report called Shaping the Nature, which is the government's own report prepared by the Department of Home Affairs and Treasury. It makes it very, very clear that Australia has benefited from population growth and immigration. But it also makes the very, very clear statement that if you don't stay alive to the challenges of immigration and population growth, then those benefits could be diminished over time.
Do you agree with that, Peter?
Oh, look, when I drive a car, I like to look out of the front window. And occasionally I glance in the rear vision mirror, and I think that's important, but I think we need to look forward. And just because immigration, you won't get any argument for me that immigration's been fantastic for this country, and I'm certainly not against immigration. We could be running net overseas immigration of about 70,000 a year, a level that worked really well in the 1980s and 90s, which is probably one of the most prosperous times in Australia, and still come to a sustainable, stable population by mid-century. So that, but still, 25 million people, we should have all the skills we need here already. There's 1.8 million people who are either unemployed or underemployed. I mean, there's people leaving the cities now to go out of because they're so congested. So, I mean, I think we can do all this, and there's no point to be anti-immigration. I'm not anti-immigration. It's been fantastic. But what we're having is 220,000 net overseas migration every year. It's just too much. And I mean, the immigrants actually got to live somewhere, and they do, despite what Dr. Allen says, immigrants do live in houses. And if she wants to abolish negative gear and capital gains tax, I would support that. And so does Sustainable Australia Party would support that 100%.
The second point I'd make, Geoff, is that I live by the philosophy that all politics is local. So what we know from KPMG infrastructure study reports, Infrastructure Australia and a whole variety of others is that the congestion and infrastructure deficit issues that are being felt in Melbourne and Sydney could one day be visited upon here in Perth and in Brisbane. So what Tracy Roberts has just alluded to, state and federal governments working well together to, as best they can, stay ahead of planning issues is why we need to be having these discussions now, because there is a way to stay ahead of the game.
Senator Dean Smith, Peter Strachan, thank you both very much indeed.
You're very welcome.